Nathan Cole slammed the eviction notice against his chest and stood frozen in the hallway, his son's crayon drawing still taped to the wall behind him. $312. That was everything left in the world. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried since the funeral. He just grabbed his old duffel bag, kissed Owen's forehead while the boy slept, and made a decision that would either save them or destroy him completely. The job listing said caregiver. It paid more than he'd made in 2 years combined. What it didn't say, what nobody warned him about, was that the woman in that wheelchair wasn't just paralyzed. She was waiting to die. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You're going to want to be here for all 5 parts of this one. The morning Nathan drove to Whitmore Estate, the GPS kept recalculating. Not because he took a wrong turn, but because the roads out there weren't on most maps. They wound through iron gates and hedgerows, so perfectly trimmed, they looked fake, like a movie set someone forgot to tear down. Every mile felt like peeling further away from the world. He knew the cracked sidewalks of Clover Creek, the diner where he and Linda used to split a stack of pancakes on Sunday mornings, the elementary school where Owen had just started 2nd grade and kept coming home with glitter on his shoes. Nathan gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. "You're doing this for Owen," he told himself. "Just keep driving." His truck, a 2009 Ford with a busted AC and a passenger seat that stuck if you tried to recline, it looked like a punchline parked at the end of that long stone driveway. The house at the top wasn't a house, it was a declaration. 3 stories of pale limestone, tall windows, ivy creeping up the east wing like the building itself was being slowly consumed. Manicured lawn on every side. Not one leaf out of place. Nathan sat in the truck for a full minute before he got out. He was 41 years old. He'd worked construction warehouse logistics, 2 stints as a night security guard, and 1 very bad month trying to sell insurance over the phone. He knew hard work. He knew sweat and aching backs and hands that cracked in winter. But he had never, not once in his life, stood in front of a house like this and been expected to walk through the front door like he belonged there. He grabbed his duffel, got out, straightened his collar. Here we go. The woman who opened the door before he even knocked was not Eleanor Whitmore. She was in her early 60s, silver-haired, ramrod straight, wearing a cream blouse that probably cost more than Nathan's monthly rent. She looked at him the way a customs officer looks at a passport, searching for a reason to turn him away. "Mr. Cole?" Not a question. "Yes, ma'am." He extended his hand. "Nathan Cole, I spoke with your assistant on Thursday. I'm Vivian Whitmore." She shook his hand once firmly and let go. "Eleanor's mother. Come in." She turned and walked without waiting to see if he followed. The interior of the house was cooler than he expected and quieter. His boots made a sound on the marble floor that felt embarrassingly loud. He tried to soften his steps. He couldn't. Vivian led him through a wide corridor lined with framed photographs. Company board meetings, charity galas, a younger version of a dark-haired woman in a red dress shaking hands with someone who looked like a senator. In every photo, the dark-haired woman was smiling. Big, open, the kind of smile that took up a whole room. Nathan looked at those photos longer than he should have. "She was different before," Vivian said without turning around, like she had eyes in the back of her head. Like she'd watched 100 people slow down at those photos and decided she didn't have time to be patient about it anymore. "I understand," Nathan said. "You don't. Not yet." She pushed open a heavy door at the end of the hall. "But you will." The room beyond the door was large. Floor-to-ceiling windows on one side, a hospital-grade adjustable bed against the far wall, medical equipment arranged with surgical precision along a side table. Books everywhere stacked on shelves piled on the floor beside the bed, spread open on a wide mahogany desk, like someone had been reading 3 things at once and walked away mid-sentence. And in the center of the room, positioned near the window but facing away from it, was Eleanor Whitmore. She was younger than Nathan expected. maybe 32, 33. Dark hair pulled back in a loose braid. A thin gray blanket across her lap. She sat in a manual wheelchair, not an electric one, which surprised him, and she was holding a pen over a legal pad and not writing anything. She didn't turn when they came in. Eleanor. Vivian's voice shifted softer, but still controlled. This is Mr. Cole. The new... I heard the truck. Eleanor's voice was low and even. She still didn't turn. You don't have to announce him like he's performing. Vivian's jaw tightened, just barely. I'll leave you to get acquainted. Mr. Cole, the schedule is on the desk. Medications, therapy, windows, mealtimes. You'll find everything labeled. She paused. Everything. Then she was gone. The door clicked shut behind her, and Nathan stood alone in the room with a woman who hadn't looked at him yet. He waited. 10 seconds. 20. You can sit down, Eleanor said finally. Or stand there like a lamppost. Your choice. He pulled a chair from near the desk and set it down, not too close, not too far. He sat. Nathan Cole, she said like she was reading from a file she'd already memorized. 41. Single father. One son, 7 years old. No formal caregiving certification, but 6 months as a home health aide for an elderly neighbor. Widowed 2 years ago. She paused. What was her name? He blinked. Linda. Hey. How'd she die? Nobody had asked him that so directly in a long time. Most people said, I'm sorry for your loss, and looked away fast, like grief was contagious. He'd gotten used to people dancing around it. Ovarian cancer, he said. 14 months from diagnosis to... He stopped. 14 months. She turned the wheelchair then, slowly, and for the first time he saw her face straight on. She wasn't angry. She wasn't cold the way he'd expected from Vivian's warning glances, and the way the previous caregiver had apparently quit by leaving a resignation letter on the kitchen counter at 5 in the morning. She looked tired, not the tired of someone who hadn't slept, the tired of someone who had been fighting something enormous and quietly, privately lost. Did you hold her hand? Eleanor asked. Yes. At the end, yes. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to the window. The schedule on the desk covers everything you need to know. You can start with the morning medication protocol. He stood, picked up the schedule, looked it over. It was thorough, almost aggressively so. Times down to the minute. Medication names, dosages, specific instructions for positioning, physical therapy exercises, dietary restrictions. He noticed at the bottom of the page in someone else's handwriting, smaller, neater than the typed text above a single line. Do not ask her about the accident. He set the schedule back on the desk. Is there anything you want to tell me? Nathan said carefully. Before I start. She didn't turn around this time. Yes. Okay. I've had 4 caregivers in the past 8 months, she said. The first one cried every time she had to help me with personal care. It made me feel like a tragedy. I'm not a tragedy. No, ma'am. The second one was very enthusiastic, brought me inspirational quote cards, and tried to get me to watch documentaries about people who climbed mountains without legs. I threw a book at him. Despite himself, Nathan almost smiled. Did you hit him? No, my aim's off to the left. A beat. The third one spent most of her time on her phone and thought I didn't notice. I noticed. The fourth one quit because I told him to stop looking at me like I was something he could fix. She paused. I'm not something to be fixed, Mr. Cole. Am I clear? Clear, he said. You want to be treated like a person. She was quiet. Not a tragedy, not a project, he continued. Just a person who needs some help with some things. I can do that. Another long pause. He waited. The medications are in the top drawer left side, she said. Gloves are under the sink in the bathroom. He nodded, went to get started. He was halfway across the room when she spoke again quietly. She's lucky. You're Linda. Her voice didn't waver, but something in it pulled taut like a rope with too much weight on it. That she had someone holding her hand. Nathan stopped walking. He didn't turn around. He didn't say anything. He just stood there for a moment, absorbing that the weight of what she meant and what she didn't say, and then he kept moving. The first week was exactly what he'd expected, and nothing like he'd expected. The physical work he could handle. Helping Eleanor with positioning with transfers with the twice-daily stretching routine the physical therapist had designed it was demanding. But Nathan had spent years doing labor that pushed his body, and he knew how to move without complaining. He was gentle when he needed to be, and efficient when that was what she wanted. What he hadn't anticipated was the silence. Eleanor didn't make small talk. She read constantly dense books, mostly history and philosophy, and the occasional brutally thick legal document that she marked up in red pen with a ferocity that made him think she'd been a different kind of force before the wheelchair. She answered questions with as few words as possible. She didn't thank him, not sarcastically, not pointedly, just simply didn't. The same way you don't thank a well-designed appliance. He didn't push. That wasn't his style. Linda had always said Nathan Cole was the most stubbornly patient man she'd ever met, which she meant as both a compliment and an accusation. You'll wait out a storm, but you'll also wait out a conversation, she used to tell him. Sometimes people need you to meet them halfway. He thought about that a lot that first week. On Thursday afternoon, he was reorganizing the supply cabinet in the bathroom when he heard her voice from the main room. "You have a son." He leaned out through the doorway. "Owen." "Yeah." 7? 7.5. He'd want me to include the half. She had a book open in her lap, but she wasn't looking at it. "Where is he while you're here?" "With my mother back in Clover Creek, about 2.5 hours south." He went back to the cabinet, kept organizing. "I call every night at 8:30. He goes to bed at 9. He doesn't mind you being away." Nathan took a breath. "He minds. He just doesn't say so. He's at that age where he thinks being strong is the same as being quiet." A pause. "He sounds like someone I know." Nathan put the last box of supplies on the shelf and came back to the doorway. Eleanor was looking at the book again, but he had a feeling she wasn't reading. "He drew me a picture before I left," Nathan said. "Stuck it in my bag without telling me. I found it the first morning here." She looked up. "What was it?" "Me," he said. "Driving the truck." He drew the clouds with faces on them. They were all smiling. He shrugged the way a man shrugs when something has gotten into his chest, and he doesn't know what to do with it. "Kid's 7.5, and he's already trying to make sure I don't feel alone." Eleanor looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at her book. "You can take the cabinet next to the bed for your personal items," she said. "You don't have to keep your bag in the closet." It wasn't much, but coming from her, it was something. The second week, things shifted, not dramatically. Nothing in their relationship moved dramatically. It was all incremental degrees of change, too small to name in real time. But Nathan noticed. She started asking questions. Small ones at first. How did he take his coffee? Had he always lived in Clover Creek? Did he have family besides his mother and Owen? "No," he told her. "Dad left when I was 9. Only child. Linda's family is in Phoenix. They keep in touch for Owen's sake, which I appreciate." "Do you miss her?" she asked one afternoon. Not carefully, not gently. Just asked the way she asked most things, directly without ceremony. He looked up from the logbook he was updating. "Every single day." She nodded like that was the answer she'd expected. "Does it get smaller?" she asked. "The grief." "No," he said honestly. "It just gets familiar, like a piece of furniture you stop knocking into because you know where it is." He paused. "You learn to live around it." She was quiet for a while. Then, "What if you don't want to live around it?" He looked at her. She wasn't looking at him. She was staring at her hands turned palm up in her lap. "Then it gets harder," he said. "But you do anyway." She didn't respond to that, but she didn't look away from her hands for a long time. It was on a Tuesday morning in the third week that Nathan found the folder. He hadn't been snooping. He wasn't that kind of man. He'd been straightening the desk she'd asked him to, said the stacks were driving her crazy, and a large manila envelope had slid off the corner and hit the floor and spilled. He picked up the papers automatically. The letterhead stopped him cold. It was from a clinic in Switzerland, a legal firm in New York, a letter from a doctor he'd never heard of, but whose specialty he recognized. He'd done enough research in those terrible 14 months with Linda to know what palliative care consultation meant and what it meant when it appeared alongside phrases like voluntary assisted dying and eligibility assessment. His hands went very still. There were printed emails, a timeline, a checklist. Someone, Billionaire, had been planning this carefully, methodically, with the same precise organization that ran through everything else in this house. Nathan stood there for a long moment, the papers in his hands, the room absolutely silent around him. Then he heard the soft sound of the wheelchair in the hallway. She was coming back from her physical therapy session. He had maybe 30 seconds. He put the papers back in the envelope, set the envelope back on the desk, sat down in his chair, picked up the logbook. When she rolled through the door, he was writing. "How was PT?" he asked without looking up. "Same as always." She wheeled herself to her usual spot by the window. "The therapist thinks I'm making progress. Are you?" "Maybe." She reached for her water glass, drank. "She seems encouraged." He finished writing the entry in the logbook, set it down. Looked at her. She looked tired after PT, more tired than usual. And there was something else on her face. Not pain, not physical pain, but a particular kind of exhaustion that Nathan recognized. He'd seen it in the mirror after Linda's last round of treatment. The exhaustion of someone who was running out of reasons. "You okay?" he asked. She looked at him. And for just a fraction of a second, something passed across her face that she didn't quite manage to control, something raw and unguarded and terrifying. Then it was gone. Her expression smoothed out like water after you drop a stone. "Fine," she said. "Can you check if my mother called? I left my phone on the charger." He went to check, but his hands, he noticed, were not quite steady. He stood in the hallway outside her room, and he thought about the folder, and he thought about Linda, and he thought about Owen's drawing with the smiling clouds, and he thought about a woman in a gray blanket asking him if grief could ever get smaller. And he made a decision. He wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. He didn't know how to save someone. He'd failed at that once already in a hospital room 2 years ago, with 14 months' worth of hope bleeding out between his fingers. He knew he couldn't fix what was broken in that room any more than he could have fixed what was broken in Linda's body. But he could stay. He'd learned how to do that. He'd learned it the hard way. He wiped his hands on his jeans, stood up straight, walked back through the door. "Your mother did call," he said. "About 4 this afternoon. I'll call her back tonight." Billionaire was already reading again, or pretending to. Nathan sat down in his chair. Outside, through the tall windows, the late afternoon light fell across the floor in long gold stripes, and somewhere very far away, 2.5 hours south, a 7.5-year-old boy was probably coloring something at his grandmother's kitchen table, putting smiles on everything he drew, because that was just how he saw the world. Nathan thought, if he can do it, so can I. He picked up his logbook. He stayed. End of part 1. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. Nathan didn't sleep well that first night after finding the folder. He lay on the narrow bed in the staff room at the end of the east corridor, staring at the ceiling, and the papers kept arranging themselves in his mind. The letterhead, the checklist, the careful, methodical handwriting in the margins. Not frantic, not desperate. Organized. That was the part that got him. He'd seen desperation before. He knew what it looked like when someone was drowning and grabbing at anything. This wasn't that. This was someone who had already made up their mind and was simply working through the logistics. That was worse. He called Owen at 8:30, same as always. "Dad?" Owen's voice came through the phone, warm and immediate, the way only a child's voice can, like it carries no distance at all. "Grandma made pot roast." "Yeah. How was it?" "Too many carrots. Your grandmother's been putting too many carrots in her pot roast since 1987. I've been fighting that battle my whole life." Owen giggled. That sound, thin and bright and completely uncomplicated, did something to Nathan's chest that he didn't have a name for. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was more like being reminded that happiness was still a real thing that existed somewhere in the world. "Did you draw anything today?" Nathan asked. "A dinosaur and a truck, and the house we're going to live in when you get paid." Nathan closed his eyes. "What's it look like, the house?" "Big, with a yard and a tree with a tire swing." A pause. "And a dog." "We talked about the dog, bud." "I know. I put it in anyway." Nathan exhaled slowly. "Smart man." After he hung up, he sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and thought about the folder for a long time. He thought about what his options were. He could tell Vivian Whitmore. He could call the agency that had placed him here. He could pretend he hadn't seen it and do his job and let whatever was going to happen happen. None of those felt right. He thought about what Linda would have said. She'd been sharper than him, quicker, the kind of woman who could read a situation in about 30 seconds and know exactly what it needed. She used to say that most people already knew what the right thing to do was. They just needed to be quiet long enough to hear themselves think. Nathan sat in the dark. He got quiet. By morning, he knew what he was going to do. Nothing dramatic. No confrontation, no speeches. He was just going to stay. He was going to show up every single day and do his job and be present. And he was going to trust that presence, real, unhurried, unafraid presence, was something Eleanor Whitmore had not had very much of lately. It wasn't a plan exactly. It was more of a commitment. And Nathan Cole was very good at commitments. So, 3 days later, the physical therapist came. Her name was Dr. Anita Reyes, and she arrived every Monday and Thursday at 10 in the morning with a rolling bag of equipment and the particular brand of relentless cheerfulness that Nathan had come to think of as professional armor. She was good at her job. He could tell that. But he could also tell from the way Eleanor's jaw set the moment she heard the doorbell that the sessions were something she endured rather than engaged with. He stayed nearby while they worked. Not in the room. Eleanor had made it clear early on that she didn't want an audience, but close enough to hear. Most of the session was quiet. Instructions, counts, the occasional grunt of effort. Then, midway through, he heard Eleanor's voice go flat and hard. "I said stop." A pause. Then Dr. Reyes carefully. "Eleanor, we were so close to completing the—" "I said stop." Louder this time. Not hysterical. Just done. Nathan set down his coffee and walked to the doorway. Dr. Reyes was standing back, hands raised slightly, expression neutral in the way medical professionals get when they're deciding whether to push or retreat. Eleanor was in the center of the room, chest heaving, both hands gripping the wheels of her chair hard enough to whiten her knuckles. She looked up and saw Nathan in the doorway. Something shifted in her face. Not relief exactly, more like the anger redirected itself, and in the space it left behind, he could see how much the effort was costing her. "We're done for today," she said, still looking at Nathan. Dr. Reyes glanced between them, made a note on her tablet, and began packing her bag with professional efficiency. On her way out, she stopped beside Nathan and said low enough that only he could hear, "She's stronger than she thinks, but she has to want it." Nathan nodded. When the door closed, he walked in and pulled his chair up to where Eleanor had positioned herself back near the window facing away from the room. He didn't say anything for a while. He'd learned that with her. The silence wasn't emptiness. It was a kind of communication, and if you interrupted it too fast, you missed what it was trying to say. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "You can save the pep talk." "Wasn't planning one." "Good." She released the wheels, flexed her fingers slowly. "She wants me to start using the parallel bars, standing exercises." "I know. I read the updated therapy notes." "I can't." She stopped herself, started again. "It's not that I can't. The doctors say there's partial sensation still. In certain positions, under certain conditions, there's some—" She stopped again. Her voice had developed a slight tremor that she was visibly working to control. "It would mean there's a possibility of some recovery. Partial." He waited. "I don't want a possibility," she said, quiet now and flat. "A possibility means you have to try. And if you try and it doesn't work, that's a different kind of failure than not trying at all." She turned the chair enough to look at him sideways. "You understand that?" "Yes," he said, because he did. God help him, he did. He'd been there standing at the edge of hope, knowing that hope had a cost, that the further out you leaned, the harder you fell. "Then you understand why I told her to stop." "I understand why," he said. "Doesn't mean I think you're right." She turned to face him fully. Her eyes were sharp and a little dangerous. "You've been here 3 weeks, Mr. Cole." "Nathan." "Nathan." She said it like she was deciding whether or not to grant a concession. "You've been here 3 weeks, and you think you know what's right for me." "No," he said evenly. "But I know what it looks like when someone's decided to stop before they know the ending." The silence that followed was different from the other ones. Harder, charged. "That's a very arrogant thing to say," she said finally. "Maybe." He didn't flinch. "But you're not angry because I'm wrong." She stared at him. He met her gaze and held it. Not aggressively, there was nothing combative in him, not with her, but steadily. The way you'd hold a light in a dark room, not to blind anyone, just to keep the dark from winning. Then she turned away. "Get me my book," she said, "the blue one, on the second shelf." He got it, set it in her lap. She opened it without looking at him, but she didn't ask him to leave. Vivian Whitmore came on Friday. She arrived the way she seemed to do everything precisely on schedule and several degrees cooler than the room required. She greeted Nathan with a nod that managed to convey both acknowledgement and dismissal simultaneously, and she spent the first 40 minutes with Eleanor behind closed doors. Nathan organized the linen closet and tried not to listen. He mostly failed. He couldn't make out words, but he could read the temperature of the conversation through the wall. Vivian's voice controlled and paced Eleanor's answers shorter, then shorter still, until he heard what sounded like a long silence, and then a single sentence from Eleanor that made Vivian's next response drop to a murmur. When Vivian emerged, she pulled the door almost shut behind her and turned to face Nathan with the expression of a woman who had more problems than she had solutions for. "Walk with me," she said. He followed her down the corridor to the small sitting room near the front of the house. She stood by the window the same way Eleanor always positioned herself, he noticed, with her arms folded and her gaze aimed somewhere outside. "She seems different," Vivian said. "How so?" "More engaged. Less." She paused, searched for the word. "Less actively unpleasant." A beat. "That's a significant improvement, Mr. Cole. The previous caregivers reported that she barely spoke." "She talks when she wants to," he said. Vivian looked at him then. It was an evaluating look, not hostile, but watchful. The look of someone deciding how much to say. "You should know," she said, "that I chose you specifically because of your file. The experience with your wife's illness. I thought someone who had been through sustained caregiving, not professionally but personally, might have a different quality of patience." He thought about the folder on the desk, the checklist, The clinic in Switzerland. Mrs. Whitmore, he said carefully, has your daughter spoken to you about her plans? Her long-term plans. Vivian's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. A tightening. The kind that happens when someone is controlling a reaction rather than having one. Eleanor's long-term decisions are her own, she said. Yes, ma'am? My role is to ensure her immediate quality of care. I understand. Your role, she continued, and her voice sharpened slightly, is to support that care, within the boundaries of your position. Are we clear? Nathan looked at her. He thought about what she wasn't saying. He thought about how a mother's face looked when she'd already accepted a loss she couldn't prevent, and was managing the grief in advance, the way you board up windows before the storm arrives. We're clear, he said. He went back down the corridor. When he passed Eleanor's door, which was slightly ajar, he heard her on the phone. Her voice was different from the one she used in the room, harder, crisper, more like the woman in the red dress in all those photographs. I said I want the quarterly figures before end of day Tuesday, she was saying. Not a summary. The full breakdown. And tell Marcus I want to see the Hargrove proposal before he submits it, not after. Nathan stopped outside the door. Because it's still my company, David. A pause. Yes, from a wheelchair. Try to contain your surprise. Another pause longer. Her voice went quieter, but not softer. I'm aware of what the board is saying. Tell them I'm aware. And tell them that aware is all they need me to be right now. She hung up. Nathan stood in the hallway for a moment, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he felt something shift in his understanding of her. Not pity, she'd made it abundantly clear that she didn't want that, but something closer to recognition. The way you recognize a familiar wound on someone else and realize with a start that you've been looking at the scar without seeing what caused it. He knocked on the doorframe. Your 2 o'clock medication, he said. She was already turned toward the door. There was something bright and unguarded in her expression for just a moment, the residue of having been briefly herself on that phone call before it settled back into its usual careful arrangement. Right, she said. Come in. It was Owen who changed everything. Or rather, it was a Saturday afternoon phone call with Owen that Eleanor overheard, and which she brought up 3 days later on a Tuesday evening, while Nathan was updating the medication log, and she was supposedly reading. Your son thinks clouds have feelings, she said. Nathan looked up. He does. You told him that? No, he figured it out himself. He went back to the log. He said once that when the sky is gray, it means the clouds are tired. I didn't argue. He sounds unusual. He's extraordinary, Nathan said plainly without self-consciousness. I don't say that because he's mine. I say it because it's true. He's got something I don't know what to call it. An openness. Everything in the world is interesting to him. Everything has a reason behind it that's worth knowing. Eleanor had set her book down. He noticed, but kept talking. Linda was like that too. That's where he got it. He closed the log. I'm the steady one, the one who shows up and keeps the lights on. But they're the ones who make a room feel different just by walking into it. You loved her very much, Eleanor said. Still do. He said it simply, without drama. I think that's probably not going to change. She looked at him for a long time. He let her look. I killed someone, she said. The room went very still. Nathan didn't move. He kept his eyes on her face, open and steady, and he waited. The accident, she said. Her voice was even almost clinical, but he could hear the current underneath it, the thing that had been dammed up for a long time, pushing against every word. There was a woman in the other car. 29 years old. She had a 4-year-old daughter. She stopped. I had been drinking. Not enough that I thought I genuinely did not believe I was impaired. That's the part I've never said out loud to anyone. She met his eyes. I didn't know. I thought I was fine. And she's dead. He sat with that. He didn't jump to fill the silence with reassurance, which he knew instinctively was not what she needed. He just let it exist between them, the full enormous weight of it, because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a person's truth is refuse to make it smaller. "What was her name?" he asked finally. Eleanor blinked. He thought maybe she was surprised by the question. Most people probably asked about the accident itself, the legal outcome, the therapy, the grief, not the name. "Cheryl," she said. "Cheryl Matson." "And the daughter?" "Grace. She's 6 now." A pause. "I know because I've had someone keeping track. I don't—" She pressed her lips together. "I don't know what I intend to do with that information. I just couldn't stand not knowing." Nathan nodded slowly. "I lost the use of my legs that night," she continued. "The doctors said it was the impact, the angle of the collision. Spinal injury incomplete." She looked down at her hands. "There are people who'd say that's justice. I've thought that myself." "Is that why?" he asked. And she knew exactly what he meant. She looked up at him, and this time she didn't look away. "Partly," she said. "And partly because I've been running a company since I was 26, and I've been the person everyone looked to, and the person who made the decisions, and the person who—" Her voice caught. "Just once, just briefly. And now I can't walk to my own window. And there is a 6-year-old girl named Grace who is growing up without her mother because of me. And I lie awake at night and I think, what is the argument for continuing? What is the part of the story that makes this worth finishing?" The silence after that was the longest one they'd shared. Nathan leaned forward in his chair, elbows on his knees, hands loosely clasped. He looked at the floor for a moment and then back at her. "I don't have an answer to that," he said. "I want you to know I'm not going to pretend I do." She nodded almost imperceptibly. "But I'll tell you something," he said. "That night in the hospital, the last night with Linda, it was 3 in the morning and the nurses had left and it was just me. And I sat there holding her hand and I thought there is absolutely no reason on this earth for this to be happening. None. No argument, no framework, no theology gets me to a place where this makes sense." He stopped. "And it still doesn't make sense. 2 years later, it still doesn't make sense. But Owen drew me a picture with smiling clouds. And I drove up here. And I'm sitting in this room talking to you." He looked at her steadily. "The argument for continuing isn't always a reason. Sometimes it's just you wake up and there's coffee, and someone needs something and you do it, and then there's another day." She stared at him. "That's a terrible argument," she said finally. "I know." For the first time in a long time, Nathan smiled, real and small and tired. "But it's the one I've got." She looked at him for a long, long moment. Then something happened that he didn't expect. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a breakdown or a revelation. She just exhaled, deep and slow, like she'd been holding her breath for a very long time. "Dr. Reyes wants me to try the parallel bars on Thursday," she said. He kept his expression calm. "I know." "I'm not promising anything," she said immediately. "I'm not saying it's going to work, and I'm not doing it because of what you just said, so don't flatter yourself." "Understood." She picked up her book, opened it, then without looking up, "But I'm not canceling it this time, the session." Nathan sat back in his chair. He didn't say anything. He picked up the medication log and went back to his notes. Outside the window, the evening was coming in slow and gold, and somewhere to the south, in a house that smelled like pot roast and too many carrots, a boy with his mother's eyes was probably getting ready for bed and looking at the clouds. And in a room full of books and medical equipment and the long, complicated weight of 2 people's separate griefs, something very small but very real had shifted. It wasn't hope yet. Not quite. But it was the shape of something that could become it. Thursday came. Nathan was up at 6, same as every morning, and he moved through the pre-therapy routine with the same quiet efficiency he always did. Medications at 6:40, the brief stretching exercises that preceded any major physical session breakfast at 7:15. He didn't mention the parallel bars. He didn't reference the conversation from Tuesday evening. He'd learned that with Eleanor acknowledging a decision too directly was the fastest way to make her reconsider it. She didn't respond well to being watched making progress. It made her feel like a performance. So he acted like it was any other Thursday. She let him. Dr. Reyes arrived at 10 with her rolling bag and her professional cheerfulness, and this time when she greeted Eleanor, something was different. The jaw didn't set. The shoulders didn't rise. Eleanor looked at the physical therapist with the particular expression Nathan had come to recognize as her version of resigned willingness, not enthusiasm, not acceptance exactly, but a decision not to resist. "The bars?" Dr. Reyes asked, keeping her voice careful and even. "The bars," Eleanor said. Nathan stepped out of the room. But he didn't go far. He stood in the corridor with his back against the wall and his arms crossed, and he listened. He heard the sound of the equipment being positioned. He heard Dr. Reyes' instructions slow and clear. He heard the shift of weight, the effort, the breath that came out sharp and controlled, not a gasp, not a cry, just the sound of someone working enormously hard at something that cost them. Then he heard Eleanor say very quietly in a voice stripped of every defense she usually carried, "I can feel that." And Dr. Reyes, who to her great credit did not overreact, said simply, "I know. That's good. That's real." Nathan pressed his back harder against the wall and stared at the ceiling and breathed slowly through his nose. He stayed in the hallway until the session was over. When Dr. Reyes came out with her bag, she looked at him, and the professional cheerfulness had softened into something more genuine. "She did well," she said. "Yeah," he said. "She did." He waited another 2 minutes before going back in. He wanted to give Eleanor time to compose herself, because he understood instinctively that she would need it, that what had just happened in that room was enormous to her, and enormity needed space before it could be looked at. When he walked in, she was back in her chair by the window. Her hair had come loose from its braid. She was holding her water glass with both hands and staring at it like it was the most interesting thing she'd ever seen. He sat in his chair, said nothing. After a while she said, "My left leg. There's a specific, it's not full sensation. It's more like pressure, a signal, like a phone ringing in another room." She paused. "But it rang." "Yeah," he said. She looked up. Her eyes were dry. He got the impression she'd decided a long time ago that she was done crying in front of people, and it was a decision she'd kept. But there was something in her face that was wide open, in a way it hadn't been before. Something unguarded and a little frightened, the way people look when hope shows up without permission. "Don't read too much into it," she said, but she was saying it to herself as much as to him. "I'm not reading anything," he said. "I'm just sitting here." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Order me something from that Thai place. The one my mother disapproves of. The one with the yellow sign on Marlowe Street. That's the one. Your mother says the sodium content alone is wur. Nathan. Ordering now," he said. It was that evening while they were eating Eleanor with her pad thai, and her particular focused enjoyment of anything her mother would consider nutritionally irresponsible, that she said something that caught him off guard. "Tell me about the day Owen was born." He looked up from his own container. "Why?" "Because you talk about him, and you get a specific expression that I find—" She considered her word. "Clarifying. Like watching a compass find north." She ate a forkful. "So tell me." He set down his fork, leaned back, and for the first time in that house, he smiled without any reservation in it at all. "It was February," he said. "Coldest February on record in Clover Creek. Linda had been in labor since 11 the night before. By morning she'd been awake for 14 hours, and she was absolutely furious." He shook his head. "Not at me, just at the whole situation. She kept saying, 'I did not agree to this,' which made no sense, but she said it approximately 40 times. Eleanor's mouth curved. Not quite a smile, but close. The nurse was this enormous woman named Bernadette, and she had zero tolerance for drama, and enormous tolerance for pain, and she and Linda sort of sized each other up and reached an agreement. I stayed out of the way. I was useless. I held Linda's hand and she crushed approximately 3 of my fingers, and I didn't say a word. Smart man. Survival instinct. He picked up his fork again slowly. And then at 6:43 in the morning, Owen showed up. And he was the most alarming-looking thing I'd ever seen in my life, because nobody tells you that newborns look furious, Eleanor said. Exactly like that. And Linda, who had not slept, who had been in pain for 14 hours, who had just gone through something I can't fully comprehend, she looked at him and she laughed. He stopped, swallowed. She just laughed, this enormous, exhausted, happy laugh, and she said, "Oh, look at you. You're so angry about everything already. You're going to fit right in." Eleanor put down her fork. Nathan looked at his food. "I don't tell that story very much," he said. "It's one of the ones that's still close to the surface, even after 2 years." "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly. "Thank you for asking," he said. They ate in silence for a while after that, but it was the comfortable kind, the kind that meant 2 people didn't need to perform for each other anymore. The call from Mrs. Whitmore came on a Saturday morning. Nathan took it in the kitchen, and he knew within the first 15 seconds that this was not a routine check-in. "I need to speak with you about something." Vivian's voice had a particular quality he hadn't heard before, clipped in a different way, not her usual controlled authority, but something wound tight over something else. "There are people at the company, on the board, who are concerned that Eleanor's—" A pause. "Recovery has stalled." "Her recovery hasn't stalled," Nathan said. "She started parallel bar therapy this week." "Yes, her physical recovery, I mean her—" Another pause, more deliberate this time. "Her involvement. They're concerned she's retreating further from operational oversight. They've proposed a motion." He didn't know exactly what that meant in corporate terms. He knew enough to understand it wasn't good. What kind of motion? A capacity assessment, to evaluate whether she's fit to retain voting shares and executive authority. The words were delivered evenly, but he could hear what they cost her. "They want to bring in an independent psychiatric evaluator." Nathan said nothing for a moment. He looked across the kitchen toward the corridor that led to Eleanor's room. "Does she know?" "Not yet. I wanted to." Vivian stopped. And in that pause, for the first time, he heard her without the armor. Just a mother. A mother who had been terrified for a very long time and was exhausted by the effort of not showing it. "I wanted to understand the situation before telling her. She doesn't need another thing to fight right now." "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, choosing his words carefully. "With respect, she's going to need to know. And she's stronger than you think." A long silence. "You've known my daughter for 4 weeks, Mr. Cole." "Yes, ma'am. And in 4 weeks she started therapy. She'd been refusing for months. She's re-engaging with her company. He stopped himself short of saying the thing he knew about the folder, the clinic, the checklist. "She's fighting. She might not look like it from the outside, but she is." Another pause. Then quietly, "You remind me of someone." "Who?" "Eleanor, before the accident." She didn't elaborate. "I'll come Tuesday. We'll tell her together." The call ended. Nathan stood in the kitchen for a moment with the phone in his hand, and then he went back down the corridor, and he knocked, and he went in, and he sat in his chair and picked up a book he'd been reading, and he didn't say anything. Eleanor was on her laptop scrolling through what looked like a financial document, making notes with a red pen that she kept clicking against her palm when she was thinking. She'd pulled her hair up, and she was wearing her glasses, dark frames that she kept in the desk drawer and almost never wore when anyone was around, which told him she'd forgotten he was there, which meant she was genuinely absorbed, which meant she was herself. He looked back at his book and did not allow himself to feel good about that. Not yet. On Monday, two things happened. The first was that Owen called at an unexpected time, not the usual 8:30, but 3 in the afternoon, which made Nathan's heart kick sideways before he picked up, because unexpected calls from children are always either very mundane or very not. It was very mundane. "Dad, I lost a tooth." Nathan exhaled. "Which one?" "The front one. The one that was wiggling." Owen's voice had the particular hushed excitement of someone reporting enormous news. "Grandma says I can put it under my pillow tonight." "How much do you think the tooth fairy's paying these days?" $5, Owen said confidently. "Tyler at school got $5. Tyler at school might be running a negotiation I'm not aware of." "Dad, it's $5. I'll see what I can do." When he hung up, he was grinning. He didn't even realize it until he looked up and saw Eleanor watching him from across the room, with an expression he couldn't quite read, something thoughtful and removed like watching something through glass. "Tooth," he explained. "I gathered." She held his gaze for a moment. "You should go see him." "What?" "This weekend. You've been here 5 weeks. Go home for the weekend. See Owen." She said it matter-of-factly, like it was a scheduling adjustment rather than a concession. "I'm not going to deteriorate in 48 hours. "I know that." "Then go." He looked at her. "Are you sure?" "Nathan." She gave him the particular look she used when she thought he was being slow. "I just told you to go. If I wasn't sure, I wouldn't have said it." He nodded. "I'll arrange for the weekend nurse. My mother can come. She'd prefer it." She finds the arrangement. She searched for the word. "Irregular." "Your mother finds a lot of things irregular." "My mother finds everything about you irregular." She went back to her laptop. "She also told me this morning that my color's better, which is her version of saying you're doing a good job." He smiled. High praise. From her extremely. She clicked her pen twice. "Go pack a bag. Leave Friday afternoon. Be back Sunday evening." He went to pack a bag. The second thing that happened on Monday happened that night after dinner, when Eleanor called him back into the room after he'd said goodnight. He came back to find her sitting with a letter in her lap, printed paper, formal letterhead, and even from the doorway he could see that her hands were not entirely steady. "They sent this to my personal address," she said. "Not through legal, my personal address." She looked up. The board. The capacity assessment. So Vivian had told her. Or she'd found out another way. He stepped into the room. "I know," he said. Her eyes sharpened. "You knew. Your mother called Saturday. She told me they were planning to tell you Tuesday. Together." The sharpness didn't go away, but it changed direction, turned inward the way anger does when it's trying to figure out where it belongs. "She told you before she told me," Eleanor said. "She wanted to be careful about how she told my caregiver before she told me." Her voice was controlled, but she was gripping the letter hard. "Because she still thinks she still operates as though I'm a patient to be managed, rather than a—" She stopped. "Rather than a person who runs her own company." "You're right," Nathan said simply. "That wasn't the right call." She blinked. He thought maybe she'd expected him to defend Vivian. "She did it because she's scared," he continued. "That doesn't make it right, but it's why." Eleanor looked at the letter, then at him. "They want to assess my psychiatric fitness to retain control of Whitmore Capital," she said. "My company. The company I built from a 12-person consulting firm into something that employs 400 people." Her voice was still steady, but underneath it something was building. "Because I use a wheelchair, and I've taken a leave of absence." "What are you going to do?" She raised her eyes to his, and in them he saw something he hadn't seen in any of the previous weeks. Not the exhaustion, not the grief, not the controlled distance. He saw anger, clean and purposeful and completely alive. "I'm going to walk into that boardroom," she said. Then she caught herself. A brief dark flicker, and she amended it without looking away from him. "I'm going to be present in that boardroom, in my chair, with my attorney, and 5 years of performance records, and the full support of every major shareholder who knows what I built." She pressed the letter flat against her leg. "And I'm going to make them regret the postage." Nathan felt something open up in his chest. He couldn't explain it exactly. It was the way it felt when you'd been watching a fire burn low for a long time, and then suddenly there was a gust of wind, and the flames jumped, and you remembered what fire was actually capable of. "Okay," he said. "I need David to get me the full shareholder contact list tonight. It's 10:30. David's used to it. She was already reaching for her phone. Then she stopped, looked at Nathan. "Can you stay while I make calls? I don't need anything. I just—" She seemed briefly uncertain how to phrase it. "The room feels different with someone in it." "I'm not going anywhere," he said. He moved his chair back toward its usual spot and sat down and picked up his book. She made 4 phone calls in the next 2 hours. He sat and read, or tried to read. Mostly, he listened to her, to the Billionaire who existed in those calls, who was precise and formidable and completely without hesitation, who said things like, "That's not a position, that's a negotiation tactic. Let's talk about the actual numbers, and I don't need a majority, I need the right 3, and call me back by 9 tomorrow. I don't care if it's early." At 12:40 she put the phone down. "David says we have enough," she said. "If we move before they file the formal petition." "Good." She was quiet for a moment, then softer. "I haven't felt like that in a long time." "Like what?" Like something is worth fighting for." She turned toward the window. "It's a strange feeling, after you've decided it isn't." Nathan closed his book. He looked at her profile against the dark window. "How does it feel?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then, very quietly, "Terrifying. And—" She stopped, seemed almost surprised by what came next. "And good. It feels terrifying and good." He nodded. "Those usually go together," he said. She didn't look at him, but the line of her shoulders changed, dropped. Something in her, some long-held brace against the world, eased by a fraction. "Go to bed, Nathan," she said. "You have a long drive Friday." He stood. "Good night. Good night." He walked to the door. "Nathan." He stopped. "Thank you," she said, "for staying in the room." He didn't make it into anything bigger than it was. That was the thing he'd learned with Linda, with Owen, and now here. The important things didn't need inflation. They were already as large as they needed to be. "Any time," he said. He turned off the light in the hallway and went to his room, and the house settled around him with its old weight and its complicated silences, and he lay in the dark and thought that somewhere in the last 5 weeks, without either of them intending it, this had stopped being a job. He wasn't sure what it was instead, but he lay there thinking about it for a long time before sleep came. He drove to Clover Creek on Friday afternoon with the windows down. The drive took 2 hours and 40 minutes, and for most of it Nathan didn't listen to the radio. He just drove and let the distance accumulate and tried to figure out when exactly his life had split into 2 separate things: the life he'd always had, the one with Owen and his mother and the cracked sidewalks of Clover Creek, and this new life that had started 5.5 weeks ago when he'd pulled his truck up a stone driveway and knocked on a door he wasn't sure he should be knocking on. It wasn't a bad feeling. It was just unfamiliar, like wearing someone else's coat that turned out to fit you. Owen was waiting on the porch when he pulled in. He came off that porch running before Nathan even had the truck in park, and Nathan barely had the door open before his son's arms were around his neck, and there was a small, fierce face pressed against his jaw. "You smell different," Owen announced. "Different how?" "Like a big house." Nathan laughed. He couldn't help it. He pulled back and looked at his son at the gap in his front teeth, the smear of something blue near his ear, the shoes tied in the wrong size loops, and something in him that had been held carefully in place for weeks simply let go. "Let me see the tooth situation," he said. Owen grinned enormously, gap and all. "Perfect," Nathan said. "Absolutely devastating." His mother Carol appeared in the doorway with her arms crossed, and the expression she'd been making since he was 12 years old, the one that meant she had 17 things to say and was deciding which one to lead with. "You look thin," she said. "I'm not thin." "You look like you haven't been eating." "I eat 3 meals a day." "I'll make something," she said, and turned back inside, which was her version of saying she was glad he was home. That night, after Owen was asleep, deep immediate, the unconscious abandon of a child who'd run full speed at the day and crashed at the end of it. Nathan sat at his mother's kitchen table with a cup of coffee and told her about Billionaire. Not everything, but enough. Carol listened the way she'd always listened, without interrupting, without redirecting, turning her coffee cup in slow circles on the table while he talked. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You like her," she said. "She's complicated. Interesting." Nathan. "Mom. You like her?" She said again, not as an accusation, just as a fact she was placing on the table between them. He looked at his coffee. "I don't think that's relevant to the situation." "It's very relevant to the situation. She's my employer. She's dealing with an enormous amount of—" Nathan. His mother put her hand over his on the table. She was 67 years old, and her hands were smaller than he remembered them being, and the sight of that did something uncomfortable to him. "Your father left when you were 9. You spent 30 years being the steady one, the responsible one, the one who held things together." She patted his hand once. "It's okay to want something for yourself." This isn't. I know what it looks like," she said simply. "I looked at your father that same way before things went sideways, and I looked at your grandfather that same way and things didn't go sideways." She withdrew her hand and picked up her coffee. "The looking isn't the problem. The looking is just human." He sat with that for a while. "She's going through something enormous," he said finally. "It's not the time." "No," his mother agreed. "Probably not." She stood and carried her cup to the sink. "But time moves, Nathan. That's the one thing it reliably does." He drove back Sunday evening. Wait. He knew something had happened before he was fully through the front door. The house had a different quality to it, a tension in the air, the particular atmospheric pressure of a conversation that had recently ended badly. The evening nurse, a quiet woman named Patricia, who filled in on weekends, passed him in the entryway with her bag and her coat, and gave him a look that communicated a great deal without saying anything. He went directly to Eleanor's room. She was at her desk. Not reading, not working. Just sitting with her hands flat on the surface in front of her, looking at nothing. "How was Clover Creek?" she asked without turning around. "Good. Owen's tooth is fully gone. Major event." He set his bag down. "What happened?" "My mother was here." "I know. I arranged it." He came into the room. "What happened?" She turned the chair. She was wearing a different expression than any he'd seen before, not the anger from Monday night, not the exhaustion, not the controlled distance. This one was quieter and more complicated, the expression of someone who'd been told a truth they weren't ready for. "She asked me," Eleanor said, "whether I had developed feelings for you." The room went very still. Nathan kept his face even. "What did you say?" I told her it was an absurd question. A pause. She said she'd take that as a yes. He sat in his chair. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "Is she wrong?" he asked. Eleanor looked at him directly, the way she did most things, without evasion, without ceremony. "I don't know. I've been trying not to examine it too closely, because examining it leads to complications, and I have enough complications." She turned one hand over on her desk. What I know is that you're the first person in 2 years who has made me feel like a person and not a condition, and I'm aware that's not the same thing as... She stopped. It might not be the same thing. No, he agreed quietly. It might not be. He looked at her. But it's not nothing either. She held his gaze. My mother thinks you've overstepped, she said. She didn't use that word. She used phrases like professional boundaries and appropriate distance. But that's what she meant. And what do you think? I think, she said carefully, that appropriate distance was slowly killing me. And that you somehow knew that without being told. She looked down at her hands. Which is either very perceptive or very inconvenient, depending on the day. He didn't reach for her hand. It wasn't the moment for that, and he knew it. But he leaned forward slightly in his chair, closing some of the distance between them, and said, I'm not going to tell you what any of this means. I don't know what it means. But I'm not going to pretend it means nothing, just because it's complicated. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Once. The way she decided things. My mother is coming Tuesday, she said. She wants to... She pressed her lips together. She wants to have a conversation about restructuring the caregiving arrangement. I see. I told her to come Tuesday. She met his eyes. I didn't tell her what I'd say when she got here. Tuesday came the way hard days tend to, with perfect ordinary weather and no warning sirens. Vivienne arrived at 11. She was dressed as impeccably as always, and she greeted Nathan with a courtesy that was so precise it was almost surgical, acknowledging his presence without conceding anything by it. She went directly to Eleanor's room and closed the door, and this time Nathan didn't stand in the hallway and listen. He went to the kitchen and made coffee, and sat with it, and waited. He waited 45 minutes. When the door opened, Vivienne came down the corridor, with a different quality to her walk than usual. Still straight, still controlled. But something in the architecture of her composure had shifted. She came into the kitchen doorway and looked at Nathan with the expression of a woman who had been bested by her own child and had decided to respect it. She wants you to stay, Vivienne said. Okay. I want to make clear. She stopped herself, started again. I want you to understand that my concerns are not about your character, Mr. Cole. They're about my daughter's vulnerability. In a situation where the balance of... I understand, he said. You're her mother. It would be strange if you weren't concerned. She looked at him with that evaluating look. She trusts you. I know. That's not something she does easily, or historically well. She came fully into the kitchen, picked up the coffee he offered without being asked. The last person she trusted without reservation was the girl who died in the accident. He hadn't known that. He was careful not to show how much it landed. They'd been friends since college. Vivienne continued looking at her coffee. Eleanor was the one who insisted they drive, not Cheryl. Eleanor. She always had to be in charge, always had to be the one making the decisions. A pause. That's what she's carried. Not just that she made a mistake, but that she made this decision and Cheryl went along with it because she trusted her. And then she died. Nathan was quiet. Take care of her, Vivienne said. Not as an instruction, more like something released. Like she was handing him a weight she'd been carrying alone and acknowledging that she couldn't carry it anymore by herself. Yes, ma'am, he said. She finished her coffee, set the cup down with her characteristic precision. And as she passed him in the doorway, she said without stopping, The Thai place on Marlowe Street has too much sodium, but the pad Thai is excellent. I've always thought so. Then she was gone. Nathan stood in the kitchen and stared at the empty doorway for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly and almost smiled. That night, Eleanor told him what she'd said to her mother. He was reorganizing the bookshelf she'd asked him to sort alphabetically by author, which was a project that had been deferred for weeks, and she was in her usual spot, but angled toward him instead of the window, which he'd noticed she did more and more lately. I told her that what was between us, whatever it is, was mine to manage, not hers. She said it without drama, the way she said most things. I told her that she needed to choose between being my mother and being my administrator, because she couldn't be both anymore. He kept sorting books. How'd she take it? Badly. Then well. A pause. She's better at adjusting than she appears. She just needs time to reload. She's not a bad person, he said. I know. She's also been making my decisions for 2 years because I stopped being willing to make them myself. She was quiet for a moment. That ends now. He pulled out a biography and checked the author's name and slotted it in the right place. She told me, he said carefully, about Cheryl, that you were close. The pause that followed was long enough that he turned to look at her. Eleanor was looking at her hands. The same way she had the night she'd told him about the accident, palms up, like she was reading something written there. She was my best friend, she said. Since sophomore year at Georgetown. She used to say that I was the most impossible person she'd ever met, and she loved me for it. Her voice was steady, but it had the particular quality of someone reading from something inside themselves that they'd memorized through repetition. She was gentle. The opposite of me in almost every way. She cried at commercials. She remembered everyone's birthday. She had this enormous capacity to just be present with people. She looked up. Like you, actually. He didn't say anything. After the accident, she continued, I used to think if it had to be one of us, it should have been me. I could make that argument very cleanly. She had grace. She had so much more reason to... She stopped. But then I'd think I was the one who decided to drive, so in some way it was. Me. Just not the way I expected. Eleanor. She looked at him. The fact that you survived isn't a punishment, he said. I know that's not how it feels, but it isn't. Then what is it? He thought about that. He took his time with it because she deserved that. Not a fast answer, not a platitude, but the real thing, whatever it was. I don't know, he said honestly. I've asked myself that same question about Linda, and I don't have a clean answer. But I think maybe it's just the next thing. The thing that comes after, and what you do with it is the only part that's still up to you. She held his gaze for a long time. I've been thinking about Grace, she said, Cheryl's daughter. I know. You told me you've been keeping track of her. I want to contact the family. She said it like she'd been working up to it and decided to just say it plainly. Cheryl's sister has custody of Grace. I've had my lawyers reach out twice in the past year and been told they don't want contact. She straightened in the chair. I want to try again. Not through lawyers. A letter. From me. That's a significant step. Yes. They might still say no. I know. Her jaw was set in that way he'd come to recognize as her version of courage. But I've been waiting for a sign that it was the right time. And I think I've been using that as an excuse not to try. He looked at her. Do you want help writing it? Something shifted in her face, a softening so brief and slight that if he hadn't been paying attention, he would have missed it. You'd do that. You'd want me to, he countered. A pause. Yes, she said quietly. I think I would. They spent the next 2 hours on it together, Eleanor dictating, revising, discarding, starting again. Nathan sat across from her with a legal pad and wrote down every version without commenting on any of them until she asked. And when she asked, he was honest. That version sounds like a legal document. That one sounds like you mean it. That line is the truest thing you've said all night. The final letter was half a page long. It didn't explain or justify or request forgiveness. It said, I think about Cheryl every day. I think about Grace. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I haven't moved on, and I don't intend to, and if there is ever anything at all, I can do, I will do it. And I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I know it will never be enough. But it's the truest thing I have. When Eleanor read it back, she held the paper steady. Is it too much? She asked. No, he said. Is it enough? I don't think that's the right question. She looked at him. The right question, he said, is whether it's honest. And it is. The most honest thing you've written. She folded the letter, set it on the desk. I'll have David send it tomorrow, she said, before I change my mind. The board meeting was held virtually 2 weeks after the letter from Vivian's kitchen table. Nathan didn't watch it. He sat in the hallway outside the room, while Eleanor's voice traveled through the closed door, clear and even and completely, without apology for 47 minutes. He heard numbers. He heard her say the word unacceptable twice, which both times was followed by a silence long enough that whoever she'd said it to was clearly recalibrating. He heard her say once in a voice so quiet it barely reached him. If the board would like to question my capacity, they're welcome to do it to my face. I'll wait. More silence. When the call ended and she opened the door, she was holding her phone, and she looked exactly the way she'd looked after the parallel bars session, wrung out and wide open, and more alive than before it started. Well, Nathan said, the motion is tabled. She said it flatly, but her hand on the wheel was unsteady, and she was controlling it. Indefinitely. Meaning they backed down. She looked at him. All of them. He breathed out slowly. David says I sounded like myself, she added. He said he hadn't heard me sound like that in 2 years. She stopped. He cried a little, which I pretended not to notice. Very diplomatic. I have my moments. She looked at him steadily. Nathan, I need to say something. He waited. I found the folder, she said. His expression didn't change, but everything behind it shifted. He looked at her and said nothing. I saw you find it, she continued. You didn't know I was there. I was coming back from PT early. Dr. Reyes canceled the second half, and I came down the hall, and I saw you through the gap in the door. I saw you pick up the papers. Her voice was completely even. She'd had a long time to prepare this, he realized. I saw your face. He was very still. I didn't say anything, she said, because I didn't know what to say. Because everything you did after that moment, all of it you did, knowing. And you didn't treat me differently. You didn't look at me differently. You didn't call my mother or the agency or... She stopped. You just stayed. Yes, he said. Why? He thought about the honest answer. He gave it to her. Because it wasn't my decision to make, he said. And because I thought maybe what you needed wasn't someone to intervene. It was someone to make it worth reconsidering. She looked at him for a long, long moment. The folder is gone, she said. I threw it out 3 weeks ago. He didn't react outwardly. But somewhere deep in him, something that had been braced for a very long time, finally quietly let go. Okay, he said. I haven't contacted the clinic. Her voice didn't waver. I'm not going to. Okay. That's all I wanted to say. He nodded. She turned the chair back toward the room, then stopped. Thank you, she said, for making it worth reconsidering. He didn't answer right away. He thought about Linda and Owen's drawing, and the smiling clouds, and a 7.5-year-old boy who put smiles on everything he drew, because that was simply how he believed the world should look. He thought about what it meant to stay not heroically, not with grand intention, but simply because staying was what you did when something mattered. You did that, he said. Not me. She was quiet. Go home this weekend, she said again. Owen's going to need a new drawing to send you. He sends them without me asking. I know. The faintest curve at the edge of her mouth. Tell him the clouds were good, but I think he can do better. Nathan looked at her. I'll pass it along. He went back to the hallway, and the house settled into its evening rhythms. The hum of her laptop, the faint sound of traffic somewhere outside, the particular silence of two people who had stopped performing for each other and were simply finally existing in the same space. It was the closest thing to peace he'd felt in 2 years. And the most terrifying part was that he didn't want it to end. The letter reached Cheryl Matson's sister on a Thursday. Nathan didn't know that. Eleanor didn't tell him right away. She'd sent it through David, not through the lawyers this time, just a regular envelope with a stamp and her return address written in her own handwriting. And then she'd done the thing she always did when she'd committed to something irreversible. She'd gone back to work, buried herself in financials, in board preparations, in the relentless machinery of running a company from a wheelchair in a room full of books. She didn't talk about the letter for 9 days. Nathan didn't ask. On the 10th day, she told him. He was heating up soup in the small kitchen off her room, the one her mother had stocked with things Eleanor would actually eat, as opposed to what the nutritional guidelines recommended when she called him. Nathan. Something in her voice. He came to the doorway. She was holding her phone in both hands, and she was looking at it the way people look at things that have just changed the shape of their world. Not destroyed it, just rearranged it, permanently. She wrote back, Eleanor said. He came into the room, sat in his chair. Cheryl's sister, Margaret. She said the name carefully, like she was placing a fragile object down. She wrote back. A handwritten letter, 3 pages. She looked up. She said that she'd spent 2 years teaching herself to hate me. She said it was easier than grieving. And she said, her voice caught. Just once. She steadied it. She said Grace asked about the accident last month, for the first time. She's 7 now, and she asked how her mommy died. And Margaret said she sat there and realized that she'd been carrying so much anger that she hadn't left room for... Eleanor stopped. She pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling and breathed. For the truth, that it was an accident. That accidents happen to good people and bad people and people who are neither, and that what happened to Cheryl was a tragedy and not a verdict. Nathan leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and said nothing. She said she can't promise anything, Eleanor continued. She said she doesn't know if she'll ever be ready to meet me. But she said that she'd read my letter to Grace, not the whole thing. She edited it, she said, for a 7-year-old. But she read her the part that said... She looked down at her phone. Her hands were steadier now. She was choosing to be steady, and the choice was visible, and he respected it enormously. The part that said your mother was the best person in any room she walked into, and I was lucky to know her, and I think about her every single day. Silence. She said Grace listened to that, Eleanor said. And then she asked if the person who wrote it was sad. And Margaret told her yes. And Grace said... Now her voice broke cleanly and completely, and she let it. Grace said, that means Mommy mattered to her. That's good. I don't want Mommy to be forgotten. Nathan sat in his chair in a house that had been full of silence and carefully maintained distance for the better part of 2 months, and he felt the weight of all of it. Eleanor's grief, his own, the letter, the little girl with her mother's name in her memory, and her aunt's handwriting telling her she wasn't forgotten, and he didn't try to hold any of it at arm's length. He just let it be as large as it was. She's not forgotten, he said finally. No. Eleanor wiped her face with the back of her hand. Once. Efficiently. Then she set the phone on the desk and straightened in her chair with the particular deliberateness that meant she was choosing to keep going. She's not. She asked him to order from the Thai place that evening. They ate in the kind of silence that didn't need filling. And when he cleared the containers and said goodnight, she said his name once quietly, and when he turned, she just looked at him for a moment and said, I'm glad you didn't leave. Me too, he said. He meant it without qualification. 3 weeks later, Eleanor stood up. Not metaphorically, not in any borrowed symbolic sense. She stood up, gripping the parallel bars, shaking with the effort of it. Her jaw set and her eyes focused on the wall in front of her, with an intensity that could have burned a hole through it, and she stood fully for 11 seconds before Dr. Reyes caught her on the way down. Nathan was in the room this time. She'd asked him to be. He stood in the corner with his arms crossed and his face completely neutral, because that was what she needed. Not emotion, not witnesses to her vulnerability, just a presence that wasn't going anywhere. He watched her go up. He watched her come down. He watched Dr. Reyes's hands catch her steady, her ease, her back into the chair. Then he watched Eleanor turn the chair to face him. She was breathing hard. Her arms were shaking visibly. She looked like someone who had just climbed a mountain they'd been told they'd never climb, and instead of triumphant, she looked leveled. Like the effort had swept everything else away and left only the most essential version of her. 11 seconds, she said. I know, he said. I counted. She laughed. It was brief and breathless and surprised, as if it had come out of her before she had time to decide about it. It was the most unguarded sound he'd ever heard her make, and it did something to him that he was still deciding how to live with. Dr. Reyes said something about muscle groups and progression, and the next session, and Eleanor nodded and answered her, but her eyes came back to Nathan, and he held the look, and it was the kind of look that had too much in it to name all at once. After Dr. Reyes left, she sat for a long time without speaking. Then she said, I used to run. Yeah. Every morning, 5 miles. Rain, cold, didn't matter. It was the one thing that was entirely mine. No board, no employees, no mother. She looked at her hands on the wheels. I've been telling myself for 2 years that I'd never have that back, that it was gone along with everything else. And now, she looked up. And now I stood up for 11 seconds, which is nowhere close to 5 miles. A pause. But it's 11 seconds more than yesterday. He nodded. That's all it is, she said, and he understood she was saying it to herself as much as to him. Just 11 seconds more than yesterday. That's all it ever is, he said. It was Owen who brought everything into focus. Nathan had been turning something over in his mind for weeks, not a decision exactly, more like the shape of one, the way you can feel the outline of something in the dark before you can see it. He knew what was happening between him and Eleanor. He wasn't a man who lied to himself about important things. He'd looked at what was growing in that room slowly, incrementally, the way everything real grew, and he'd named it honestly in his own mind, even if he hadn't said it out loud. What he didn't know was what to do with it, or whether doing anything with it was right or fair or wise. Owen settled it, not intentionally. The way children settle things by simply being entirely uncomplicatedly themselves. Nathan brought him to the house on a Saturday. He'd asked Eleanor first. He'd been careful about it, had framed it as a question, not an assumption, and had made it clear there was no pressure, that it was entirely her call. She'd been quiet for a moment. Then she'd said, Saturday, morning, not too early. Owen walked into Eleanor Whitmore's house, the way he walked into everything, with complete absence of self-consciousness and total attentiveness to everything around him. He looked at the corridor, looked at the photographs on the wall, looked at the floors, and then looked up at Nathan and said, It smells clean. It's a clean house, Nathan agreed. Our house smelled like pine, Owen said thoughtfully. When Mom was there? Nathan's chest tightened. Yeah, it did. Owen filed that away somewhere and kept walking. Eleanor was by the window when they came in. She'd arranged herself, he could tell from years of reading her, with deliberate casualness that was actually deliberate care. She was wearing a deep blue sweater he hadn't seen before. Her hair was down. Owen looked at her. You're in a wheelchair, he said. I am, she said. My friend Tyler's grandpa is in a wheelchair. He can pop the front wheels up. I can't do that yet, she said. I'm working on it. Owen considered this seriously. You should practice in a hallway first. Tyler's grandpa did the carpet, and then he could do the sidewalk. That's good advice. I'm Owen. I know, I'm a Billionaire. He thought about this for a moment. That's a hard name. Most people think so. Can I call you Ella? Something crossed her face so briefly that if Nathan had blinked, he would have missed it. Not upset, the opposite of upset. Like a door opening somewhere that had been closed for a very long time. Yes, she said. You can call me Ella. Owen nodded satisfied and began looking at her bookshelves. Nathan stood in the doorway and watched his son move through the room, pulling out a book, looking at the cover, putting it back, asking questions that Eleanor answered with a directness that matched his perfectly, because she had never in her life spoken down to anyone, and she wasn't about to start with a 7-year-old. Owen asked why she had so many books. She said because books stayed interesting longer than most people. He asked if his dad was interesting. She looked at Nathan briefly and said yes so far. Owen said his dad was the most interesting person he knew, which made Nathan look at the ceiling and Eleanor look at her lap, and when they looked at each other again, they were both carrying the same small, quiet smile. After 2 hours, Owen climbed into Nathan's truck full of things to say about the bookshelves, about the Thai food Eleanor had ordered for lunch, about how she knew all the capitals of every state because Nathan had quizzed him and she'd gotten every single one. Did you know Delaware is a state? Owen said. I did know that. I forgot Delaware. She didn't. He was quiet for a moment, looking out the window. Then, Dad. Yeah, bud. She's lonely. Nathan drove. What makes you say that? Owen shrugged. The house is too quiet for one person. Our house was too quiet too. After Mom. He turned from the window. But she's better when you're there. I could tell. Nathan kept his eyes on the road. Are you going to keep working for her? Owen asked. For a while, yeah. Good. Owen turned back to the window. He had the certainty of a child who had identified a situation, diagnosed it accurately, and moved on. She needs someone to stay. Nathan didn't say anything, but he drove the rest of the way home with his son's words sitting in his chest like something permanent. It was a Tuesday evening. It was always somehow a Tuesday when Nathan finally said the thing. Eleanor had been in back-to-back calls all day, and by 6 she had the particular kind of exhaustion that came not from effort, but from sustained performance, from being on, from being sharp and clear and unassailable for hours, when part of you was still learning how to stand up for 11 seconds. Nathan had made dinner. Simple grilled chicken. The roasted vegetables she'd stopped pretending to dislike bread, because she had a weakness for bread that she'd confessed exactly once, and he'd never commented on. They'd eaten. He'd cleared. And now he was at the desk writing up the week's medication log, and she was reading, and the room had the kind of quiet that had become over 3 months, the specific texture of an evening between two people who knew each other. Nathan, she said. Yeah. I've been thinking about your employment contract. He looked up. Okay. It's a 12-week contract. Renewable. She had her finger marking her page. We're at 11 weeks. I know. I'd like to renew it, she said. But I want to be honest with you about something first. He set down his pen. He waited. What I said to my mother, that what was between us was mine to manage, I meant that. But I haven't managed it. I've been letting it exist without naming it, because naming things makes them real, and real things can be lost. She looked at him steadily. I'm tired of not naming things. I've been not naming things for 2 years, and it nearly killed me. Literally. He held very still. I don't know what the logistics of this are, she said. I don't know what it looks like from the outside, or what it costs, or what it asks of you. I'm aware that my life is complicated. I'm aware that I come with significant, documented complications. She set the book aside entirely. But I know that for the first time in 2 years I want a future. And I know that the shape of that future has you in it. Not as a caregiver. As, she paused, as someone who stays because he wants to. Nathan looked at her for a long time. He thought about the driveway on the first morning and how his truck had looked like a punchline in front of that limestone house. He thought about the folder on the desk and the papers in his hands and the decision he'd made in a hallway to simply stay. He thought about Linda, who would have read Eleanor Whitmore in about 30 seconds and decided she was worth every bit of the effort. He thought about Owen saying she needs someone to stay with the simple, devastating clarity of a child who had lived through loss and come out the other side, still believing the world was full of faces worth drawing smiles on. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "That's not exactly what I asked," she said. Careful. Precise. Because she was always precise. "I know," he said. "I'm getting there." She waited. "When Linda died," he said slowly, "I told myself I was done. Not out of loyalty, she wouldn't have wanted that, she would have told me that was stupid. Just," he searched for it, "just because I couldn't imagine standing in front of something real again, something that could be lost." He looked at Eleanor. "And then I drove up a driveway I almost didn't find on the map, and a woman told me she wasn't a tragedy, and she wasn't a project, and she was right on both counts." He leaned forward in his chair. "You're the most complicated, most difficult, most relentlessly honest person I've met in my entire life. And I have been showing up here every day, not because the contract says to. I think you know that." Her eyes were very steady. So was her voice. "Say it clearly, Nathan." He looked at her, and he did something he hadn't done since Linda. He stopped calculating risk, stopped measuring distance, stopped being the steady one long enough to be the real one. "I love you," he said. "I don't know what that means for tomorrow, or next month, or the year after. But it's what's true right now, and you asked me to name things, so there it is." The room was very quiet. Eleanor looked at him the way she'd looked at the phone after Margaret's letter, like something had rearranged itself permanently into a shape she hadn't expected but recognized as right. "I'm not easy," she said. "I know. I'm going to have bad days. Days where I push you away because I don't know how to let people stay without testing whether they will. I know that too. And I'm not," she stopped. "I'm not the woman in those photographs in the hallway. Not anymore. I don't know who I'm becoming yet. I'm still figuring that out." "So am I," he said. "So is Owen. So is everyone who's still going. That's just what going looks like." She looked at him for a long, long moment. And then quietly, without announcement, without the kind of drama that the moment in a lesser story would have insisted on, she said, "I love you too. I've been trying not to for about 6 weeks." He almost smiled. "How's that been working for you?" "Terribly," she said. "I'm very bad at it." This time, he did smile. Full and unguarded the way he'd smiled about Owen's tooth and never expected to smile about anything else. "Well, don't get better at it." She looked at him, and for the first time since the photographs in the hallway, since the woman in the red dress with the room-filling smile, he saw her without the weight of 2 years pressing down on every feature. She looked for one clear moment like someone who had survived something enormous and come out the other side still in possession of herself. It was the most beautiful thing he'd seen in a very long time. 6 weeks after that, on a Friday afternoon, Margaret called. She called Eleanor's personal number, which Eleanor had included at the bottom of the letter, and when Eleanor saw the number, she sat without answering for 2 full rings. Nathan was across the room. He looked at her. She looked at him. She answered. He stayed. He didn't hear what Margaret said. He only heard Eleanor's side, the yes and the I understand, and the long silence in the middle where she closed her eyes and pressed her lips together, and the part near the end where she said, her voice barely above a threshold, Tell her she can ask me anything she wants to know. I'll answer honestly." A pause. Even the hard questions, especially those. When she hung up, She sat with the phone in her hands and Nathan waited. "They'll meet me," she said. "Not yet, but eventually." Margaret said Grace has been asking questions about what her mother was like in college, about whether she was funny, whether she was smart. She exhaled slowly. Margaret said she realized she needed someone who knew Cheryl before she was a mother, before she was the person who died. She looked at Nathan. She needs someone who knew her when she was just herself. "And you were there for that," he said. "I was there for all of it." Her voice was unsteady, but she held it. "The good parts too, not just the end." She straightened. "I can give Grace that. The good parts." He nodded. "That's not nothing," he said. "No," she said. "It's not." She looked toward the window. The light was coming in at the late afternoon angle that meant the day was finishing itself gold and unhurried, and outside the world was turning in its ordinary way. Traffic somewhere, a bird somewhere, the world continuing with the indifference and the beauty that were somehow impossibly the same thing. "Dr. Reyes thinks I might walk with a cane," Eleanor said. "Not soon, but eventually. Maybe." "What do you think?" She was quiet for a moment. "I think I don't need to know yet." She turned from the window. "I think I just need to show up Thursday." "Thursday," he said. "And do 11 seconds. Or 12. Or fall down and do it again." She held his gaze. "That's enough for now." He looked at her, this woman who had been waiting to die in a house full of light, who had decided incrementally and imperfectly, and without any single dramatic moment of transformation to stay, and he thought, this is what it looks like. Not the movies, not the resolution where everything is explained and all the losses get their balancing gifts. Just this. Two people in a room choosing the next thing, and the thing after that, and carrying what they carried, not because it got lighter, but because they got stronger, and because they were no longer carrying it alone. He thought of Owen at his grandmother's kitchen table in Clover Creek, drawing a house with a yard and a tire swing, and a dog that hadn't been agreed to yet putting smiles on every cloud in the sky, because that was simply how he believed the world should be. Maybe he wasn't wrong. Maybe that was the whole argument. Not a reason, not a framework, not a theology. Just a boy with a crayon and a father who drove 2.5 hours to stay in a room with someone who needed someone to stay. And a woman who reached down through 2 years of grief and guilt and chose deliberately, imperfectly, gloriously chose to still be here. Nathan Cole sat in his chair. Eleanor Whitmore sat in hers. And the house, which had been so full of silence and so carefully emptied of hope, was neither of those things anymore. Some stories don't end with everything fixed. They end with everything possible, and sometimes that is more than enough. Sometimes when you've been in the dark long enough, possible is everything. This was one of those stories, and it was only just beginning. End of part 5. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story moved you, drop your city in the comments. I want to see every place this reached. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. There are more stories where this one came from, and every single one of them is worth finishing.